Looks like I've got no choice now. I've done enough of these that if I don't want the end to be a complete overload of the topic, I've got to cover some of the chaotic factions now. So when I sat down to start writing this script, I had some choices ahead of me. All I've actually done so far were the Beastmen, or Beast of Chaos, but same thing. I could do the Chaos Space Marines, or get into specifics with 1,000 Suns, stuff like that. Plenty of choices there. Or one of the Chaos Gods themselves. They've each got the ability to be a proper army, and in 40k it's just Chaos Demon soup, so I could talk about it all at once and get it out of the way. Then I thought, how about I talk about the original heavy metal evil warriors who wear a pickup truck worth of armor on their bodies with enough spikes to cut through space and time itself. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, get ready to go old school. Because though this is an Age of Sigmar army, it has a pedigree stretching all the way back to the earliest days of Warhammer itself, where it was only the bad guys who had power armor, where the grim darkness of the far future had yet to truly establish what a Primarch really was. Today we cover the Slaves to Darkness, the OG servants of the Dark Gods. Those of you who only know of the Chaos Space Marines would do well to listen closely, because maybe instead of just getting Master Chief with daddy issues, you'll learn what an evil warrior really looks like. The Slaves of Darkness trace their roots back to Warhammer fantasy with the Warriors of Chaos, and at their core they've remained largely unchanged, at least when it comes to the broad strokes of the army. They're all big burly fellows in power armor that wish to tear down all that is good in the name of their dark gods. When it comes to Chaos worshippers, they're kind of the vanilla ice cream. But to be clear, by that I don't mean they're boring and average. What I mean by that is that the Slaves to Darkness are the golden standard by which every other Chaos worshipper is judged by. Spiky armor of evil, worships a pantheon of evil gods that they perform evil sacrifices to, and wants nothing more than to ransack all of reality because they're evil. After you hit all those criteria, you can start getting into the specifics, but you need all three ingredients to even be considered by the evil Chaos Gods. Did I mention they're evil? Because they're evil. And in the Age of Sigmar, they're still going strong. Still big burly fellas in power armor worshipping the Dark Gods. It's a shame they aren't Vikings anymore, since Norska no longer exists, much like the rest of the old world, but they still carry that same cursed armor around to make sure they look their best while they beat orphans to death. It's nice to see that the more things change, the more they stay the same. But unlike in the old world, they have something that makes them stand out even more as an army to take. They won. Twice, actually. There's of course the fact their predecessors blew up the goddamn world, but also early in the Age of Sigmar it was an almost uncontested chaos victory. Initially, there was nothing chaotic. Everything was okay, and even when the Gods of Order started bickering, things were still pretty good by Warhammer standards. Then things started creeping in. The Beastmen were ever present, though not in enough numbers to do more than annoy people, as always. The Skaven were invading, and while their invasions were handily repulsed, once they show up, it is a sign your universe is utterly fucked. And then, after some more miscellaneous stuff that I don't find terribly worth going into the specifics of, did Chaos make its grand appearance. The mortal realms came under siege as the Age of Chaos began, with billions dying and reality itself beginning to buckle under the strain of the conflict and chaotic incursions. The various Gods of Order were, for the most part, either defeated in short order or at least kept occupied enough in their own realms that they couldn't push Chaos out. And when Archaon the Ever-Chosen made his grand reappearance, the mortal realms were officially stuck in Schitt's Creek with nary a paddle to be seen. The only god that wasn't clowned on in some way or another by Archaon and the forces of Chaos was Malekith. Even mighty Sigmar was driven back, through a combination of the sheer power of the Chaos Gods and him being tricked into losing his hammer. Nagash also stuck around too, I guess. Yeah, he got bullied by Archaon, but he's the god of death and inventor of necromancy. It's hardly a criticism against Archaon that you can't get rid of someone like that. Afterwards, the Age of Chaos was well underway, and for several hundred years did the Chaos Gods and their followers have all sorts of fun with the inhabitants of the mortal realms. While plenty of places did either hold out or escape their notice, it's important to note that for the most part, Chaos had won. Sure, some of the other gods did okay holding them back. Tyrion and Teclis were able to stabilize the Lumineth, and Gork and Mork probably only noticed that some of the humans in the realms were spikier than they were before. But the vast majority of the mortal realms were overtaken by Chaos, left to their own devices while Sigmar desperately rushed to create a solution. Of course, with the Stormcast Eternals, the Lumineth, and Nagash all coming into their own, as well as Kragnos breaking out of his own personal jail, the forces of Chaos don't have it going totally their way anymore. While the fight is still ongoing, it seems that for the first time in Warhammer history, Chaos itself can be said to be on the defensive. Galmaraz can redeem those who follow the Dark Gods. Nagash's claim on the dead means that unless they're actively interfering, the Chaos Gods aren't getting those sweet, sweet souls, and the Lumineth are practically designed to be a hard counter to them. To say nothing of the fact that the Orcs in AOS rampage across reality before Chaos did it, so perhaps the winner of this Warhammer setting will yet be the greenest of them all. But I digress, and either way, that's all you need for backstory, to be honest. I know know it's a bit light compared to what I usually do for these videos, but I don't think the Slaves to Darkness need much backstory to figure out what these guys are all about. Look at some artwork of them while you have power metal playing in the background. Whatever you come up with in your head is probably lore accurate. Personally, I recommend Masters of the Galaxy by Gloryhammer for the theme song of these guys. You might think that it'd fit the Chaos Space Marines better, but the Chaos Space Marines aren't nearly as worthy a Gloryhammer as the Warriors of Chaos are. So why go for these guys from a lore perspective? Well, like I said earlier, they canonically have more or less one Warhammer twice in their backstory now. And while that first win was the end times and this complete and utter horse shit, it still happened. A win's a win, much as it pains me to admit it. Genuinely, no one else in Warhammer has ever done that, so if you want to have the one and only winning faction on the field, you want these guys. And if you want said winners to be bad guys, you can't really get worse than the Slaves to Darkness. Aside from the Skaven, admittedly, but their evil is funny. The Slaves to Darkness, meanwhile, are good old classic evil demon worshippers who want to rid the world of all that is good and holy in the name of the dark gods of chaos. And you know what? I love them for that. Look at the 40k Chaos Space Marines. If you ask them why they turned on the Imperium, you'll get all sorts of long-winded answers about honor and glory and treachery that boil down to daddy issues a good 90% of the time. The Horus Heresy, the epic saga of how 9 of the Primarchs turned against the Emperor, boils down to daddy issues. And I gotta be honest, that's a pretty lame reason to turn to the forces of hell. The average warrior of chaos, meanwhile, just says, "I'm an evil bastard," and then burns down a hospital because he finds it funny. And that is the best kind of evil. None of this stupid Magnus did nothing wrong, or the Emperor turned his back on me crap, where they look at a bloodthirster and somehow gaslight themselves into thinking that they have the moral high ground. The Slaves to Darkness wanted power, and they turned to the devil to get it. That's the best kind of evil, where the villain of the story knows damn well he's a prick and just revels in it. And while a fair few of the Slaves to Darkness joined Chaos because they felt Sigmar turned their back on them, I'd argue that it's a different situation. They turned to Chaos because they felt that in the darkest hour of their need, their god abandoned them to the worst the world has to offer. Not because their dad didn't tell them about the thing he was working on in his basement, so obviously the only course of action is to team up with Satan. Another reason to go at them is that you have some of the strongest forces in the setting backing you, the Chaos Gods themselves. At the end of the day, as a pantheon, they're kind of unmatched, as much as saying that burns my throat. On their own, I'm willing to bet one of the Chaos Gods could be beaten. If you lock Khorne and Sigmar in a room, my money's on the Hammer guy. Same with Gork and Morka. Hell, I'm reasonably sure it's canon that Gork and Mork beat the shit out of Khorne by accident over in 40k once. But on those few occasions they come together as a whole, good luck everybody else, you're gonna need it. And Archaon was apparently off killing entire universes before he came back to face off against Sigmar a second time, so there's another bunch of wins for Team Chaos, just in case you doubt my word. And yet, Chaos in AOS has been toned down a bit. Obviously in Fantasy they won, and over in 40k I know at least one of the writers has said that in his eyes a Chaos victory isn't a matter of if, but when. But in AOS, I genuinely think they don't have that guarantee. Sigmar's Stormcast Eternals rock the mortal realms, and while they've hit stumbling blocks, they have repeatedly shown they can go toe-to-toe with the strongest Chaos Warriors and come out on top. The Lumineth Realm Lords delete Chaos wherever they end up, and while Nagash may keep losing to Archaon, his forces have reached the 8 Peaks, which for the longest time was thought to be completely unobtainable to other races and lost to Chaos forever. And you can't really win a war of attrition against the guy who can raise the dead infinitely. If you're wondering why I'm putting them being less powerful than ever in a way in the pros section, it's simple. Nobody likes a Mary Sue. People hated the end times not only because the setting, well, ended, but because Chaos was portrayed as so overwhelmingly powerful in a way that they never were before. Taking cities that were previously unconquerable off-screen, only ever drawing in duels at worst with other factions' premier characters. And of course over in 40k, it's never not Chaos who's behind the grand evil plan. Even when the Tyranids or Necrons are involved, Chaos 9 out of 10 times will find a way to make themselves the main threat. But in AOS, other people are allowed to shine and make gains. Chaos, of course, isn't just sitting there letting everyone win. Be'lakor was arguably the first being to make true, permanent gains against the Stormcast, with his Chaos Storm shenanigans preventing them from resurrecting. And Archaon's list of defeats in the setting currently only really consists of Malekith, like I mentioned earlier. In AOS, Chaos is reliably being countered and not just winning for no other reason than they're the forces of Chaos. So if you want to be powerful but not bullshit powerful, I think the Slaves to Darkness shine in a way that Chaos hasn't in some time. They're not Abaddon in being total jokes, or Archaon during the end times and nothing more than a bunch of authors' pets. And lastly, for lore positives, Chaos is at home in pretty much every single encounter imaginable. Sneaky Black Ops style stealth missions, Chaos cults are everywhere, so a small skirmish battle is perfectly valid. Massive, realm-shaking battles for the fate of reality. Khorne attacked all the other Chaos God's forces at once during the Age of Chaos, so even at 1/4 power, the Slaves to Darkness are more than happy to throw down en masse. And unlike in the other Warhammer settings, where Chaos is on the attack 9 out of 10 times, the forces of the other Grand Alliances pretty regularly go on the offensive against the Dark Gods. This means that you can have your army of evil be a primarily defensive one, which is a nice change of pace. You've got room to fluff your army towards whatever scale of engagement you can think of, which is always nice. For their tabletop positives, the Slaves to Darkness fight like the art of them suggests they would. For the basic Chaos Warriors unit, you've got yourself a unit with 2 wounds per model, 3 up save, ward save of 5 against mortal wounds, and 2 attacks minimum per model. If you thought that was excessive, then you might want to sit down before you faint of shock, because you can give some of them marks of chaos. Choose one of the 4 main gods or Chaos Undivided, and you can get all sorts of wacky bullshit to do. Such as Khorne's Mark, where you get an extra attack if a unit charges, as well as the potential to cause D3 mortal wounds just for charging. Want your units to haul ass? Give them Slaaneish's Mark. The Great Horned Rat isn't included, unfortunately, but if nothing else, that's a very lore-accurate bit of gameplay. Bravery scores are also pretty good across the board, with a few units like the Chaos Marauder Horseman having the pretty dogshit score of 5, but most everyone else having a 7 or higher. And this is just the basic infantry. Ogroid Therodons don't have much of a save, but good lord do they hit hard. Your lord choices have the survivability and punching power of the basic units and then some, and that's not even getting into the special characters. I was gonna list off a whole bunch of things Archaon can do, but you know what? That alone would double this video's length, so here's some quick highlights. He's more or less guaranteed to get rid of endless spells. He can potentially insta-kill anything he fights, although it is rare to see. And with a 3-up save, 4-up ward, the ability to regenerate, and having 25 wounds, he's not going anywhere. A fitting stat block for someone who ended the world before. This army excels at ripping people to pieces. All in all, if you really want to murder your enemy and don't care for things like subtlety, you want the Slaves to Darkness. That's not to say that's all they can do. Their magical game is pretty good. It's not amazing, since of course that's Tzeentch's deal and he's got his own army too, but it's solid. You've got some nice if risky damage potential, some buffs and debuffs, and instantly rolling on Eye of the Gods, which I'll talk about shortly. And if you take the Gaunt Summoner, you can use spells from Tzeentch's lore, which means I lied about what I said earlier and Tzeentch not sharing. Now, I will admit to not being the biggest fan of their spell list, but I'm also spoiled in this matter because my main armies are the Lumineth and the Eldar, whose magical games are very good. Almost anyone's gonna look like a piss-poor wizard compared to elves, it's hardly fair. So with that being said, I don't think you'll be disappointed by the magical prowess of the Slaves. It feels like a nice bonus to an already solid army, rather than something that's just shit. Be'lakor can also add some tactical tomfoolery to the mix as well, because he can tell an enemy hero unit that they are simply not doing anything until their next turn. No attacking, moving, issuing commands, nothing at all. He also heals whenever people fail battle shock tests. The dude heals off fear, and I don't know about you, but I'd be pretty afraid if this thing showed up outside my window one day. You might not be, I mean you might be built different, but I would be. Now, Eye of the Gods, which to me is both wonderfully fluffy and can potentially be game-changing. Certain hero units have the Eye of the Gods keywords, and whenever they destroy a hero or monster, they roll 2d6 on the table. Now, if you roll Snake Eyes and get a 2, they die and turn into a Chaos Spawn, which sucks. On a 3, nothing happens, and anything above that gets you a whole lot of potential good results. Regeneration, a free ward, a free plus to your rend, all that and more. Your hero might even become a Demon Prince as long as you roll an 11 or 12. To be clear, the only horrible thing that can happen is on a roll of 2, which is very unlikely with 2d6, and almost everything else is helpful in some capacity. Also, non-hero units with the Eye of the Gods keyword only roll 1d6 plus 2 instead of 2d6. While this does unfortunately mean that your unit of Chaos Knights can't become a unit of Demon Princes, it also means that they can't become a unit of Chaos Spawn. The Demon Prince is kinda mid anyways, so it's not that much of a downside. You can also re-roll one of the dice as well, which is neat. For the last rules positive, it's pretty easy to make allies out of these guys with the more specifically aligned god armies. Especially Archaon, who can be slotted into almost any of the other armies without messing up their Legion-specific abilities. The Skaven are tragically exempt from this once again, but that hurts the Skaven more than you, since they don't really get any friends aside from sometimes Nurgle. As for their models, they're very good, especially with the update to the basic Chaos Warriors. I don't think the old ones looked bad, but they were way too static. I don't usually mind monopose models, but these guys weren't exactly blowing people away with their variety. But with their update, they are looking sexy. Be'lakor and Archaon are some stunning centerpiece models, and all around this army is just a joy to look at. They don't even take too much skill to paint halfway decently, since they're all bulky dudes in bulky metal armor. And unlike their chaotic Space Marine counterparts, they avoid the pitfall of everyone looking exactly the same with their Warcry units they can take. Aside from giving you even more ways to play, these units look different from everything else you might be fielding while still maintaining the theme of chaos. And lastly, real-world prices. While certainly not the cheapest army to collect, they're also definitely not the most expensive. I'm sure you can guess the reason for this that balances it out, but nevertheless you can collect a solid Slaves of Darkness army for relatively cheaply by GW standards. And real-world cheap is usually better than in-game cheap. The Horde army of your dreams sounds cool until you're paying out your mortgage for it. But before we get to the other side of that coin, on to lore negatives. To start with the no shit reason, if you don't want bad guys, you don't want the Slaves to Darkness. Moving on now. Slightly more substantial criticism related to this is how goddamn edgy they are. Now when it's portrayed in an over-the-top, fun way, this is not a problem. Rip and tear for the forces of evil. That's metal and fun. But when you start trying to take them more seriously, I start imagining someone listening to Linkin Park in their bedroom at 11 at night and thinking about how no one truly understands their pain. Not that it's impossible to take chaos seriously and do it well. A Stormcast Eternal saw Nurgle, and it was one of the most horrifying things ever written about Warhammer. Just some straight-up cosmic horror. But with that being said, it can be hard to do without sounding like you spend your off hours at Hot Topic. As much as I said that they're no longer complete Mary Sues in AOS, it's a reputation that can kind of linger. Being responsible for the end times is a reputation that can never quite be washed away, like Chaos Corruption, funnily enough. While my personal bias against Chaos is very much tainting my views here, I admit, I truly think Chaos has a bit of a negative reputation it can't shake due to how GW uses it. GW retcons Chaos losses to their heart's content, from the Storm of Chaos to the Eye of Terror campaign. Did you know that in the original 13th Black Crusade, Chaos won by the smallest margins of possible, and the Craftworld Eldar actually managed to completely secure the Webway and several Crone Worlds in the Eye of Terror? That sure is different than the current end result of the 13th Black Crusade, where the Eye of Terror is now the galactic crotch rash of terror. Guess the Eldar player should have done worse. Maybe GW would have let the rest of the events stick since they seem to be allergic to the Eldar getting a win. So yeah, while they're better in AOS, the knowledge that GW can and will use your faction to push whatever stupid crap they want to happen is always going to linger over your head. And even if you don't mind that, I'm willing to bet other people will. Also, no, I'm not apologizing for complaining about how the Eldar are treated in an Age of Sigmar video. For another actual in-universe lore negative, the people backing you are the evil gods of chaos. They're evil gods. They do not give half of a shit about their followers. Sigmar, Alariel, and the T-Twins love their followers, as does Gorgamorka in his own weird way. Some gods don't give a shit either way, but at least offer genuine boons as a reward for service and loyalty. Hell, even Nagash doesn't turn you into people soup when he gives you a power-up. He might enslave you forever and explode your head, but his power doesn't inherently hurt you unless he's trying to hurt you. Which admittedly is not an infrequent occurrence, but that's why we love Nagash. The power of Chaos, meanwhile, even just plain old vanilla Chaos Undivided, is actively harmful to those who use it. Only the strongest of wills can hope to gain anything truly substantial out of Chaos worship, and even then it comes at one hell of a price. And I just really want to make sure you understand the Chaos Gods don't care about you. Khorne only cares about blood, Slaanesh pleasure, and Tzeentch certainly doesn't care about his followers one single bit. I suppose Nurgle does in his own messed up way, but I'm just gonna be honest with you here. Nurgle's love sucks. It's largely just apathy, and it turns you into a different kind of people soup. Can't say I'm much a fan of it. And as you might expect from this, Chaos Corruption for the most people is a one-way ticket to damnation. Galmarez can cure people of it, for lack of a better word, but there's only one Galmarez. And while it probably isn't the case that only Galmarez can do that, since Alariel managed to purify some dude in the old world, it's still not exactly common. Once you're on the Chaos train, it's for the most part a one-way ticket to hell. There can be no happy ending for any followers of the Dark Gods, only the echoes of their laughter as you finally fail to meet their expectations. And a final lore negative is that they're no longer just Vikings. And you know what? That's enough of a negative to really take it into account. Vikings worshipping hell gods is awesome, and while they all look the same still, they aren't Vikings because Norsca no longer exists and therefore not everyone is gonna be a Viking. And that, by the nature of the beast, dilutes the pool of awesome. Sure, it gives more room for backstory, and that is a good thing, more options to fluff your army, but I want my Vikings, damn it. And unfortunately, not all of them are Vikings. Truly, in the grim darkness of the timeless eons of the mortal realms, there's no such thing as a Viking. Tabletop negatives now, before I get too weird with that last point. The Slaves to Darkness are a rare breed in that they can take a hit and dish out the damage, which is very good. To balance this out, the Necrons have a good shot at outrunning them. A grand total of 5 movement for the baseline Chaos Warriors. Hope you're not charging across an empty field against the Kharadron Overlords. Even their Chaos Knights and Varangard Cavalry only have a movement of 10 inches, which isn't slow, but for cavalry it isn't exactly setting the land speed record. The Chaos Chariot is admittedly fast at 12 inches and can cause a hell of a lot of mortal wounds, but you can only take 3 of them in a unit tops. Again, I admit to a bias here because I run Eldar. Anything that isn't moving at basically the speed of light or a Wraith Guard I have no interest in. And there are ways to teleport your army or make it move much faster, such as Slaaneish's Mark, so it isn't completely crippling. But if for whatever reason you can't use those buffs, say for example the casting roll to increase their movement doesn't go off, then they're footslogging it and that's all you got. And if you're fighting an army with either good magic or ranged games, or god forbid both, that can really screw you over. It's very easy to be confident in your army's X, Y, and Z abilities to pull off some movement shenanigans with until you start the dice rolls and end up with Snake Eyes for the 3rd time that match. Speaking of, you know what the ranged game of this army is? These guys. Hey, and there's 12 inches of movement again. Pretty good. With 2 wounds and a 6-up save. Hope the opponent doesn't have anything with Rend. To be fair, they can pull some trickery with their Feigned Flight move, but that doesn't matter much if they get pelted with 1,000,000 arrows before they get to the fight. Oh, pardon me, they force the enemies to subtract 1 for wound rolls against missile attacks. It doesn't matter if they get pelted with 500,000 arrows before they get to the fight. There are also those fellas I mentioned with 5 bravery earlier. That's your whole ranged game. Hope you enjoy only being able to reliably kill clan rats and free gold infantry, because anything heavier than that is probably just going to give your ranged units that plate mail stare. Also, do you remember how I said in their lore negatives Chaos actively hurts its users? Well, guess what happens if your version of Smite fails to go off? Instead of the enemy taking 3 mortal wounds, your caster does. And while the spell to allow any unit to make a roll on the Eye of the Gods table probably isn't going to cause your hero to turn into a Chaos spawn, it can still do that. Generally not a desirable outcome. Hell, there's an argument to be made that the Demon Prince isn't really worth it either, since he's arguably worse than whatever he transformed from. Just to be clear, I don't know this for fact, but a whole lot of people online said it's basically a downgrade. Whether or not that's still true as of the making of this video or in the future when you're watching it, I can't say, but the magic of this faction is definitely something to be wary of. Also, I flew into a coughing fit immediately after the first take of that line, so maybe it's best to just be wary of the Demon Prince. He can cause wounds in real life. That's pretty scary. At this point, I probably don't need to say it, but I'm once again biased here as well. Teclis is physically unable to fail at casting a spell, and Farseers are immune to perils of the warp. So the idea of built-in failure mechanics makes me cringe because I'm an elf sim, but you knew that already, I'm sure. Lastly, for the rules downsides and what counteracts the cheapness of collecting this army is that these bastards are expensive when it comes to point costs. The basic unit of Chaos Warriors is 210 points for 10 of them. 220 for 5 Chaos Knights if you want their admittedly powerful cavalry. A unit of 5 Chaos Chosen is 240 points, and if you want those chariots I mentioned earlier, that's going to run you either 100 or 300 points for either 1 or 3 of them. All of these units kick ass, I'm not going to lie to you, but naturally their price is reflective of this. If you want cheaper units, you have to deal with the Marauders or Marauder Horsemen, and those units are garbage, like I'm talking Clan Rat levels of power here. Except Clan Rats are 100 points for 20 of the bastards and only exist to eat bullets for the artillery behind them. Marauders are 85 points for 10 and don't have anything to actually stand in front of while it shoots, except for the Chaos Warriors and other actually good units which can feasibly tank all those shots anyways. They're also just old and ugly models, they've not aged well or been replaced, unlike the rest of the army. And you want to know how much Archaon costs? How much you're paying for the Ender of Realities, the Scourge of the Gods and Wielder of the Slayer of Kings? 860 points. So in smaller games, he's simply not part of the equation, and in larger games, he's what your list is built around. There's more expensive units in the game, sure, like Nagash, but that's hardly cheap. Don't get me wrong, I would say he's almost certainly worth the cost of playing him if you know how to use him. The solutions for dealing with him are either have Gotrek in your army, have a ton of artillery in your army, or hope the other guy mismanages how he uses them. But you're going to be feeling those point costs, especially if the enemy manages to take down your other forces even if they can't handle the big A. He can only be in one place at a time after all, and it doesn't matter if he handily captures one objective if the enemy gets all the other ones. Also, he's $185 US, which, to be fair, for half your army isn't bad. Good luck explaining that to either your parents or significant other though. Naturally, this is also the case for the entire enemy army. You'll reliably win fights with your core units against even some of the enemy's elite units, but anything you lose is probably going to hurt, especially if they haven't managed to at least take down one unit with them. Easier said than done to get rid of a unit of Chaos Warriors, but it's worth heeding the advice of Sergeant Johnson when it comes to these fellas. They're tough, but they ain't invincible. I bet the average Chaos Warrior doesn't even know what the ladies like either, since they most certainly don't have 66 tons of straight-up HE-spewing divine intervention on their side. I mean, they don't have artillery by that, just to be clear. And last for my downsides of them, assembling and painting the models. I do hold by the fact that they're one of the easier armies to paint, but that comes with two caveats. One is that these guys wear the spiky evil armor of evilness, which means they've got all sorts of fiddly bits to assemble that can prick your fingers. Now I, of course, am immune to this, as having diabetes since I was 1 year old means my fingertips have lost all feeling after thousands of little needle pricks. But you might not have type 1 diabetes, or you might be young enough to only ever need things like a Dexcom, where it doesn't require repeated digit mutilation to know your blood sugar. In which case, fuck you, you little scrote. You never knew the struggle of 6 insulin shots a day, of a dozen Lancet pokes a day. You coward, you utter cretin. I'm with Korn on this one. The blood flow made me stronger for it, and you will forever be weak. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you! 2 is that these spiky bits naturally mean there's a ton of things you can highlight on the model, and if you're insane enough to do this, the average model's gonna take about a year to paint to your satisfaction. I am insane enough to want to do this, so it's a good thing I don't like collecting chaos. But if you do like chaos and are cracked enough to want to do this, then all I have to say is good luck to you. I do not envy you. So that's the Slaves to Darkness. Slow and steady wins the race, and in their case, they've won that race multiple times. You've got to be willing to take some risk as well as no small amount of punishment if you want this army, but while I haven't played against them myself, I've spoken to people who either have or use them as one of their armies. They can rip and tear like no one's business, so if you lean towards chaotic evil and want to punch children in the face for being stupid and hopeful about the future, here's the army for you. And just to repeat for you here one last time, a lot of my criticisms stem from the fact they're very different from the armies I prefer. They're slow and tanky heavy hitters. I like my elves, which hit like trucks and move like the wind, but fall apart if you look at them for too long. Or the rats, who you can lose 100 models of and still be able to confidently say you're going to win the game. So don't be afraid to take up arms for the Dark Gods. The punishments are great, but the rewards can be far greater. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the tortured soul to my Chaos Lord, allowing me to fuel the dark rituals that go into the creation of these videos. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Bro, it is outstanding how much more competent Archaon is than Abaddon. You can cope all you want and say things like, Abaddon didn't fail the first 12 Black Crusades, he was marking things off his checklist. You know who wouldn't need to mark things off his checklist before finally blowing Cadia up after 10,000 years? Archaon. And he's had to deal with much more stiff opposition. Who's Abaddon have to fight? Ooh, Space Marines. Wow. Haven't seen that a million times before. How original. But you know who Archaon has to deal with? Literal walking manifestations of the gods who oppose him, from Nagash to Teclis to Sigmar himself. And of course, beyond all others are 2 very special cases Archaon still managed to come out on top against. Karl Franz, blessed be his name. No doubt he won through treachery and deceit, since you can't kill Karl Franz in a straight-up fight, but the old world is gone either way. And Grimgor Ironhide, the orc who was up against someone who could see the future and read every move he would make, and still nearly killed him. Abaddon would fold like laundry to either of them. I think Chaos Marines suck.